Accreditation, Exploitation, and Conservation by Cole Koenig. Zoos and their purpose in our society have always been a controversial topic. History of capturing wild animals and forced entertainment performances have tainted the public opinion of what zoos are. Times have changed and so have zoos. There are higher associations empowered to accredit these zoological societies based on several factors showing the functionality of the zoo. Recently, the Columbus Zoo lost their accreditation. Why should we care? What is the importance and the impact of accreditation to the zoo in our society? As times have changed, zoos have transformed themselves into informal education powerhouses. Conservation work and conservation education are now the selling points for zoos over entertainment value. Zoos have been adding education and discovery statements to their missions to reflect this transition. In order to change the societal viewpoint of zoos and their purpose, zoo accreditation must be a clear factor in visitors' motivation in attending, and zoos must make the conservation efforts in their mission statements. Zoos began as a high society activity of collecting animals, just like buying art, to create their own private museums. These early collections of exotic animals were called menageries. We can find records of ancient zoos as far back as Mesopotamia and the Aztec Empire. These private collections were just for the pleasure of the collector and not for public viewing. Modern zoos began to develop in Europe as scientists wanted to learn more about animal behavior, and this curiosity birthed the study of zoology. Animals were taken from the wild or from these private collections to be added to the public exhibition in the zoo. Early zookeepers wanted to maintain a natural habitat in order to study the animal better. The inclusion of accurate terrain and temperature to the natural habitat of the species were extremely important to these early zoos in order to get better observation of the animal. Many think of zoo exhibits as cold and industrial rooms where the animal seems hopeless inside. This comes from one of the first zoos in Paris. After being taken over during the Revolution, they disregarded the natural habitat enclosure practices and opted to squeeze as many species as possible into tightly packed displays in the easiest way they could manage. These exhibits were bare and had little to no addeds to make the animal's experience more comfortable. This exhibit design was very far removed from the original purpose of accurate observation and was focused on the entertainment value for the visitors. Tropical animals were a highlight of most early zoos. Due to climate and weather patterns that they were not adapted to, the tropical animals were housed in heated indoor exhibits. These were usually large aviaries or mammal houses, which had high rates of disease transmission. The exhibits had cement floors and tiled walls that could be hosed down, a far cry from anything found in nature. This preventative measure was another reason for the old practices of bare and unwelcoming zoo exhibits. We also need to remember that these early zoo animals were not born in captivity. Zoo animals were collected through expeditions that captured wild animals from their natural habitats. These animals were not endangered due to habitat destruction or any other threat warranting removal. They were taken for the personal gain of the explorer and the zoo. This practice threatened the wild population's ability to thrive and the health of the captive animals. As this wild capture and poaching-like behavior became frowned upon, zoos began trying to breed their species together. As these animals were bred more and more frequently together, the gene pool bottlenecked and there was little genetic variation, leading to health issues. Prominent zoo professional Catherine Rawls proved that inbreeding in small endangered populations would not help increase the population, as most young would not be able to survive. Zoos needed to change their ways once again in order to create more viable and healthier populations for these animals. Zoos began to breed their animals with other zoos in order to broaden the gene pool in the captive populations. These connections birthed the creation of the SSP, Species Survival Plan. The SSP was created in 1981 to ensure the stability and the health of endangered species in captivity. Founded in 1924, the American Association of Zoological Parks and Aquariums was set in place to mitigate the challenges organizations faced. Its purpose was to continue to advance the goals of the zoos in America, like recreation, conservation, and education. The AZA is the final power over determining whether or not animal facilities are meeting the highest standards of animal care and welfare. The AZA describes itself as the independent accrediting organization for the best zoos and the best aquariums in America and the world, assuring the public that when they visit an AZA-accredited facility, it meets the highest standards for animal care and welfare. The AZA also looks into the staff, safety, guest services, and the finances of the organization. These are factors that many would not automatically think of when deciding on animal welfare in a zoo, but in reality, these are the make or break standards for the organization's accreditation. The AZA standards cover the entirety of the organization's functioning. Accredited institutions go through approval to have the membership of the AZA renewed every 5 years. There is, of course, animal welfare and management, pet care, conservation, and interpretation standards they look at. There are more specific standards for different species, like elephants, that require more care and consideration when housing in captivity. Zoos looking to be accredited should be going above the standards that are listed. The Columbus Zoo in Ohio lost their accreditation this year when renewing their membership due to financial mismanagement and the zoo's extensive record of intentional and repeated animal transfers with non-AZA members with the goal of supplying baby animals for entertainment purposes, especially big cats. This move, coupled with some insinuating messages from the Netflix hit Tiger King that the ex-director of the Columbus Zoo was involved in the trading rings, outed the zoo for a history of wrongdoings behind the scenes. These trading rings that were highlighted in the show hold damning consequences for the conservation of the species affected, especially if accredited populations join. These privately owned animals like Joe Exotics are being bred for commercial exploitation to produce more babies for photo ops and not at the benefit of the growing healthy captive population. Tigers especially have been inbred in these private-owned facilities to produce young to show rare recessive genes, and they can suffer serious congenital defects that require lifetime care that is often unavailable or denied by the unqualified people running these trapezies. This is not an appropriate life for these animals to live with. They are unhealthy, in pain, and abused. For the Columbus Zoo to begin transferring animals with these kinds of organizations is completely inappropriate for the standard it was telling its visitors and the rest of the country it held. Investigating the business management of these organizations is so important to really assess if it is functioning at the benefit of the animals and not the people in charge. Accreditation is something that separates zoos that are correctly caring for their animals and doing their work to spread a productive and active forward messaging to support the animals to the public from the sad train wreck we saw in Tiger King. The Tiger King cast of characters and others helping to define what is generally not accepted practice and is in fact was unacceptable and unlawful. Individuals highlighted in the show have all been beaten by the ESA, Endangered Species Act, and its protection of endangered and threatened species. These kinds of organizations are the ones stuck in a faraway past of animal management that is embarrassing to the animal world and ruins the public opinion of what a zoo could be. The AZA relies heavily on their definition of what a zoological park or aquarium is in order to decide if an organization can even apply for the accreditation. They define a zoological park or an aquarium as a permanent institution which owns and maintains wildlife under the direction of a professional staff, provides the animals with appropriate care, and exhibits them in an aesthetic manner to the public on a regular basis. The institution, division, or section shall be defined as having their primary mission the exhibit, conservation, and preservation of Earth's fauna in an educational and scientific manner. The AZA is looking for a permanent place, so that knocks out any traveling organizations like a circus from the running for accreditation. There needs to be professionals working to maintain the wildlife owned with appropriate care. So the zookeepers and animal staff need to be qualified with degrees and or experience in order to work with these animals and give them the best care. The on-view exhibits need to be comfortable for the animal to be used regularly. What a mission statement of a zoo looks like drastically changed as the public perception of what a zoo should be has developed. They have added conservation and education buzzwords to steer the narrative of entertainment away from the current depiction of zoos. We can look at an AZA accredited zoo to see how their mission statement has developed to follow their goals. America's first zoo was the Philadelphia Zoo and has been accredited by the AZA for many years. Early American zoos were planned with multiple goals for the impact it would have on society: public recreation, wildlife preservation, scientific and conservation education being a few of them. The Philadelphia Zoo's current mission statement is, by connecting people with wildlife, the Philadelphia Zoo creates joyful discovery and inspires action for animals and habitats. Including a mission statement requirement in the definition of what a zoo or aquarium sets up the AZA to properly investigate whether an organization is actually implementing what they say. Being a member of the AZA and holding their accreditation to a high standard will make the organizations feel more accountable for following through. We can use the Philadelphia Zoo as an example to see how a zoo can act on their mission statement. The Philadelphia Zoo has implemented the treetop trail system, which allows some of their animals, like their monkeys, lemurs, and tigers, to roam out of their usual exhibits to above and around the visitors. This is to better connect people with wildlife and brings more interaction between the guests and animals, with space as an issue in a very confined city zoo. The Philadelphia Zoo also sponsors many different conservation programs that school kids can take part in, as well as adding a conservation education portion to their education department, focused on reaching the visitors to just discuss efforts that they can act on. I began my conservation education experience about 5 years ago working at the Philadelphia Zoo as a zoo crew high school intern. I learned firsthand how hard informal public education can be and how hard educators work at zoos to make sure that visitors are impacted by the conservation efforts they want you to leave with. This summer, I continued gaining experience at the Elmwood Park Zoo as a part of their education department and learned how to build my own programming based on conservation efforts. This is what a daily schedule working at the Elmwood Park Zoo looked like for me this summer as an intern in their education department. My official title was Conservation Education Intern, and I was tasked with running every education program that was going on that day. As you can see, there's a big group of us that work together to make sure that every visitor got a chance to interact with someone in the staff. There's a mix between animal ambassador events, like the porcupine chats, or you can have a giraffe feed, which is usually what I was tasked with. Zoos have many different ways of allowing visitors to reach their education staff, either in person or online due to COVID. The next time you go to a zoo, look up to see if it's accredited before you choose to go there. Being an informed visitor is vital if you're going to spend your money and time to learn more about animals. The importance of accreditation by the AZA for the health and wellness of animals in captivity is going to be making or breaking the conservation of threatened and endangered animals. As more and more wild populations dwindle, making sure we can provide the best care and support for these species in captivity is the most important role a zoo can hold going forward. The animals pictured here are the ones I dealt with the most at my time at Elmwood. I learned so much about the conservation efforts behind all of these different species and how important my job was in educating the visitors that came and making sure that their conservation efforts are known and that people can help support them. I hope that you continue to research accreditation and the exploitation of animals inside non-accredited institutions. Thank you.